for being here today. We are recording this, so we are thanking future viewers as well. We are in the Portland State University bookstore in the new art and social practice retail section, where you can get the foundational books of what we study and love. And I'm joined here with very special guests in person and via Zoom. My name is Glazer. I'm a graduate student in the Art and Social Practice MFA program. I'm a second-year student, and I have admired both of our guests for a very long time, all the way back into the 90s. So today is a very special day in my diary, and I'm going to pass it over to my classmate to introduce herself.
Thanks, Laura. I'm Rebecca Copper. A lot of people call me Becca or Bex. I am also a graduate student at Portland State University. And I'm in my third year. I'm getting ready to graduate. And I'm also extremely honored to have our guests here today. My practice is lens-based, but also crosses into social practice. So having Wendy Ewald here today and Katy, I think is a great opportunity to expand on that interest. So I'm going to pass it to Wendy. If Wendy, you want to talk a little bit about who you are, some of your work, and then Katy, after Wendy, you can talk about your work and who you are.
So I'm Wendy Ewald, and I've been working with communities, young people, old people, for since really 1969, and have developed a ways of working through these years, and one of those was the steps along the way was meeting Katy, and which we can both, when she gets on, we can both tell our origin story of how we met each other, but I'm very grateful to have met someone very early in my career before I did my sort of, not actually first book, but first important book, Portraits and Dreams, that Katy and I met around that book. And we also worked with students who made the pictures in that book, and did a course, little mini course in the school there on book making and the history of books, and so it was great to have Katy as a designer come and work with my students. And by the way, she is the best photo book designer and has had this history of designing really important books. So it was important for me to have someone whose work I really admire, and young people to have someone like that work with them.
Beautiful. Katy, we would love for you to introduce yourself.
Well, I would love to introduce myself. My name is Katy Homans, and I think, Wendy, that we met in like 1978, something like that, when you, something around then, when you'd been working with that group of kids in Kentucky for quite a while, and they had a really significant and amazing body of work, and you wanted to help them make a book. And so you had this wonderful teacher in high school, I think, who also knew me and who recommended me to you. So one day I was sitting in my office in Boston, Massachusetts, and I got a letter from this person I'd never heard of, typed on a manual typewriter, and it came from Kentucky. And I had never corresponded with anybody from Kentucky. And of course, I thought you were from Kentucky, and at the time you were. So anyway, you invited me to come work with your group of kids, who I think at the time were maybe 11 and 12, maybe a little bit older, but they were definitely, they were children. They weren't teenagers. So you explained what you'd done with them, which was just so amazing. They had made these wonderful pictures in assignments and conversations with you. And you had even taken them on the road. You had helped to organize exhibits for them in Chicago and in New York, I think. And not only had the pictures gone on display, but you'd packed those kids into a bus and you'd taken them to those big cities. And so they were really ready for making books of their work. And this was so long ago that nobody even thought about a computer. So I brought with me these little blank book dummies that I had made with needle and thread and paper, and then I
Beautiful.
brought
Yeah.
I brought Letraset, which I bet there's nobody in the audience who knows what that is, but that's sheets of letters. And then skipping over some exciting points, we just had this wonderful workshop with the kids, and it was so fun to see these kids make their own books. And out of that project came the wonderful book, Portraits and Dreams, that Wendy had been assembling over the years, working with those kids. And it was a really fantastic beginning to a wonderful friendship and future collaborations. So in all these years, we've now done many different projects all over the place.
And it's so
What else
wonderful.
can I tell you?
You came to, I think, maybe almost all of the places where I work. You know, whether we actually did a project or not, we were together and, you know, making friends and seeing how the kids were, or whoever it was working there. So it's more like we learned how to see in the way each other sees, but differently at the same time, and to respect those differences. And, you know,
It was such a lucky friendship that we could have a friendship and kind of a professional relationship at the same time. And so we worked together in Kentucky and then in Colombia, South America. And then I went to visit you in Morocco. And I wished I could have gone to South Africa and India. But then our latest and biggest project is in Tanzania. And anyway, maybe we should ease into the Tanzania project, but
Maybe that's a
but
good.
I have to say, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that project and how it's developed, what it's about.
do you want to start? Or do you-
Okay, yeah, I do. And so I don't know if you told everybody, you know, your colleagues here about how you got started in Tanzania, but Wendy was invited to Arusha, Tanzania by a local teacher. And how they met is such a long story that if there's time at the end, you should tell it. But anyway, she started going there and she started telling me about it. And it just sounded so interesting. And at a certain point, you invited me to come visit and go on safari and visit Africa. And I thought, oh, it's too far away. And it didn't make sense to me. And then after you'd been there, I think for a couple of years, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, you had sort of come to the end of what you could do in the local schools without moving into another stage, because you couldn't leave the materials you were using to work with behind. And yet the teachers and the kids were really enjoying what you were doing. So you asked the teachers, what can I do? How can I keep this project going? And they said that they were just desperate for printed materials, that many of the classrooms were completely empty except for a blackboard and, desks and chairs. So you, Wendy, had the brilliant idea of making posters, which would be so much less expensive to produce than a book. And so with the teachers, you made a list of all the subjects in the curriculum, and you started out figuring out how you could make a poster for geography or science or history. And then you invited me to come again, and there was plenty to do. So that's how that project got started, and it's evolved in a really wonderful and fruitful way.
And I must say, with the shout out to Portland, the Rauschenberg Foundation, Chris Rauschenberg was a big part of that, making it happen. Yeah, it was an odd thing because I was in a situation where I came there, I was invited to go there and to do a workshop for 40 teachers, elementary school teachers there. But I met a lot of resistance from the teachers. Not all of them, but some of them, that there's certain things that they didn't understand, and it made them very uncomfortable. And one of them was the idea that you could interpret pictures, that pictures themselves were not just facts. So every step of the way, I had to, which for me is great. I mean, to be wrong is a great thing for me, because I can understand what my limitations or what the limitations of what I was thinking were. And instead of having a program for kids to make things or develop their creativity as visual thinkers, the teachers weren't there yet. What they wanted the things that they were talking about and teaching about. They had since they didn't have any books or any of those other things, or visual materials, they described it as the visual material is something that's in between themselves and the students, and it's something that they could look at together, the students and the teacher, and talk about them. And also that students could talk with each other about what they were seeing. And so the whole idea of making a classroom that was more, first of all, democratic. So what everybody was seeing was important, not just the teacher. And also that they could learn from each other was a big plus, and the excitement that generated, which I know that Katy has seen the times when we saw the kids trying to see the posters where they're actually climbing on top of each other.
But Wendy, I have to interject, because there's the first time you came back from Tanzania, I'll never forget it. You came over and you said, Katy, you will not believe this. And there were two things that you had to show me. One was a picture of a classroom, a typical elementary school classroom in Tanzania. And to this day, we'll have one teacher and 100 pupils. And so when we're talking about democratizing a classroom, that was a really tall order there. Nobody thought it could be done. But the idea of looking at an image and talking about it was really breaking new ground there. And of course, the other thing that was so amazing was this piece of fabric that you had started buying and collecting, and which, in retrospect, gave the clue about how much kind of visual appreciation already existed in Tanzania. The colors were so amazing, the pictures were so amazing. And so that's been kind of our kind of secondary activity when we go to Tanzania together, is buying this wonderful cloth, in addition to making a poster.
How it changes over the years too.
Yeah.
And it's also, sorry, one more thing.
You're
It's
good.
also
You're totally good.
it's also cloth sign, visual, but it's got text in it. So,
Right.
Going back to what you were just
So-
saying, though, now, you were mentioning the other day when we had you in class about how that text on that cloth is actually really important. And so when we were looking at a photograph example of one of the posters, when we pointed out that this person was wearing a conga and how whatever it was saying or how it was positioned on the body meant something. But I want to go back to this idea of the lack of access to educational textbooks, and also how these posters kind of do a different way of, or invite a different kind of learning experience, which I think is really interesting. And also now understanding like the amount of students and pupils that you're having in one space. And if you have like a disconnect of accessibility to materials that are like a number of books, but then you can hang something on the wall, that's accessibility. Like that's that's addressing accessibility. But I'm really interested in what you guys think about the learning experience and difference of reading a textbook or having a textbook that you read together as a class versus engaging in this poster.
well, I mean, the thing is that if you have, what a typical learning experience is the teacher to write the lesson on the board, with chalk, and then the students copy it in their notebook, and then they're asked questions from the teacher, and they raise their hands one by one and answer what's in their notebook. So the change of looking at a picture of something and like we were doing this exercise the other day, and just listing what they see in the picture is radical.
Yeah.
And then, then taking that, what you see, and how can you interpret that? That's how I could, help those teachers who were so uncomfortable about not understanding interpretation. And then you start hearing that, that students have different ideas, and then they start, challenging and conversing with each other. And okay, so that's one thing. But the other thing where Katy and I, together come in there is we had to make things that had to do with them that they could see and talk about, because they didn't exist. There were posters from China, I mean, a few, but nothing with photographs that were detailed from Tanzania or from the different parts of Tanzania. So then we had to make those images. Well, first of all, the teachers had to decide what they wanted a lesson or lessons about. And so,
or what lesson could be conveyed visually in this way.
yes. And so they went into the curriculum and pulled things out. And in some cases they pulled, several things for one poster, like history, for example. So we did these posters for 10 different subjects, one of them being reading pictures, which is the basis. And so for history, they found that they wanted to use, and this is really so smart of them, they wanted to use slavery, colonialism, and then
Independence.
So Katy, then design becomes totally important to how this gets delivered in a way that makes sense, that you can look at all together, but you can also look at it as discrete pieces. And so you want to talk about that, designing that? Sorry.
Yeah. So the teachers had the idea of doing these three elements of history, and then they art directed the pictures. And you so wisely, instead of having the teachers take the pictures or the kids take the pictures or me or you got an outside photographer to come with us all to actually take the pictures that were being art directed by the teachers. So we went to a town on the coast for the the section about the slave trade. And we actually found a place where slaves had been bought and sold, and we lined people up next to it, and we found a like textile farm. Anyway, we found lots of interesting that what's the name of that interesting plant?
Sisal.
Anyway, so, good for you. So the teachers were kind of the key element to what was going to be the subject, and then we all got to work on how the pictures were going to look. But then I had this wonderful relationship with the teachers where we would sit in a little classroom, and we would have my little laptop, and we would have all the digital versions of the pictures available to us, and we would decide how to arrange them. And I'll never forget the first one that I can't remember what was the first poster we worked on, but I had assumed, I don't know why, they were all going to be horizontal. And I remember this teacher saying, no, they're not going to be horizontal, they're going to be vertical. And she had a good reason. And so we took off from there, but it was very much of a sort of trickle down collaboration that really worked.
What was the reason
And
for orientation being vertical instead of horizontal?
well, maybe to her, posters are always vertical. Or maybe it happens that with the history poster, I don't know how we would ever have done it as a horizontal picture because there are these stripes. But
there are other.
she obviously, yeah, but she'd really been thinking about it. And so it was a real lesson to me too. And I have to say also that one of the great things for me working with Wendy is that she'll say, well, let's try this. And I'll say, that's impossible. That will never work. And so it's kind of like what Wendy is saying about learning from the teachers. I've learned so much from the teachers and from Wendy, because if she says, let's try it, well, then we better try it. And it always works out.
Well, also,
and Wendy, just to, of course, interrupt, I think the first poster that you conceptualized with the teachers was the biology poster, which you decided to do AIDS as a subject. And that was such a really important, significant, and complex topic. So it was a really good start. If you could make a poster about AIDS, you could go on and make a poster about anything.
yeah, and that was totally teacher directed, because they went and looked at the curriculum, and one of the things that they noticed was important was AIDS, but also it appeared in all the different levels of elementary school.
Wow.
Because it's a real life part of the curriculum. And also, I think for me, one of the biggest things that they design-wise, and this is much more than design, but they decided that to strip the words from the posters, the least, it really should be directed almost totally from the images. And that took time to get to that point. But it just made sense every time they did that. Every time they said, no, we don't need this. Or we were going to put letters underneath the alphabet, for example, that we did. We did an HIV/AIDS alphabet for science, and we were going to put what it was underneath. And then the teacher said, no, they have to figure out what all of these things are. It has to be the visual that directs the teaching.
So when you teach teachers how to work with these posters, you start them off, as you do with students, with the reading pictures poster, where you ask everybody to look very closely at just one picture and make a list of everything that you see. And something I think that has been fascinating for all of us, the teachers, you and me, the teachers of the teachers, is that the younger the pupils, the more they see, inevitably. It's like their minds are more open, either to interpretation or their eyes are better connected to their brains or something, but it's just fascinating. And so it's kind of the lesson of there's no wrong answer. There are many, many, many right answers. So it's a absolutely wonderful teaching method. More than I think we'd anticipated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying, Wendy, about when you were mentioning when you can be wrong, how that's like a wonderful moment, or that's a really good thing for you. And I'm wondering too how that connects in learning and teaching children that there's not a right answer for everything, that there are spaces that it's okay to not know something, that it's okay to have that gap of information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say it's not just children.
Right. But in this process, because there are subjective ways of interpreting the images, they're learning that through learning in this way, which maybe in reading a textbook or having a review where you have these questions and you answer them and then your teacher says, no, that's right, or that's wrong, it's this.
Yeah, it's difficult for teachers too. I mean, I think that's been the most difficult part of the process is to, you know, help them to open up to that they're not controlling the classroom. Even really good teachers, and you know, it takes time. And also it's of course the younger teachers that are more open. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see that happen. But one of the things, well, so now what we're doing is, and it's exciting and it's also difficult, is there is a course now in the University of Dodoma that is the biggest or almost biggest university in Tanzania, and they have half of the students are education majors because they, or some combination like humanities and education, and because they have lots of school buildings, and that was a push of the government, you know, to get schools, but there weren't the teachers to fill them, so then there was another wave of, you know, of education students in the universities, so we have 3 different streams of study that are having students attend this class. So some of them are education, pure education. Some of them are humanities and education. Some of them are arts and media technology. So we actually have 700 students now. And we're hoping, this is where the Rauschenberg Foundation came in, to train as many students as we can through this course, which also is not just the course, but it's also like, you know, things are seminal books about and ideas about education that they've not had access to, like child-centered learning, for example. And then this program is in context of that. And then when they leave and go to teach, then they take the posters and the materials with them to their schools. So it's also a distribution system, which was very hard to figure out in the beginning because there were no national distribution systems until very recently, until the last couple of years. And so, you know, so this, you know, it worked in several ways. And I had a wonderful partner in University of Dodoma, and my late partner, Frau and Yoni, it was his genius to bring me in and to work with the university to figure how to make it part of their teaching and learning. And so I'm very sad that he just passed away, that we don't have that real partner right now. But we have a cohort of many teachers who we've trained over the years. So we'll see where that goes.
Is there another designer in that team of people?
Yeah, there have been. Yes. In different ways. So there have been all different kinds of teachers. But I mean, of course, nobody like Katy, but yeah, I mean, there was one who
Well,
was a design major in fabric too, and she made Katy and I twin dresses. But yeah, no, there is, and
but let me interject to sing Wendy's praises again. Something that Wendy said that we must do in this course, where we were teaching the professors who were then going to go teach the future teachers. It's hard knowing what vocabulary word to use for each level of education. So anyway, so here we are teaching the professors how to use these posters and how to explain how to use them to their students. And Wendy said, and we have to get them to make their own posters. And I'm like, how are you ever going to do that? Not everybody has a computer. Not everybody has a camera. How could we ever do that? And sure enough, this small group of, highly trained professors came up with these amazing ideas for making their own posters. One of my favorites was was she actually a science professor who came in with a stack of leaves and a stapler and a poster board, and she just stapled all these leaves onto the poster board. And so it was a botany lesson on how you identify these different leaves and connect them to the tree or the bush. But anyway, it was a completely visual lesson in this topic that would normally have been taught in a super boring way. As Wendy says, it would have been written on the blackboard, and then you would have made a note, and then you would have set it back, and so on. So anyway, there was a lot of really fascinating interaction and kind of growth throughout the levels of teaching that happened.
yeah.
It's interesting that when you were working together in Kentucky on Portraits and Dreams, you brought the handmade blank books, and like that, now you're in Tanzania and you're using materials there very creatively, somewhat rustically, not relying on technology that you plug in, but technology that's very basic. The overlaps, it's been 40 years, but still usable. It's interesting to me.
Well, it's amazing what you can make with absolutely nothing. So it's been a great lesson for me.
So that's a big part of the course, is developing these things. And also, we haven't really delved into getting some tech person come to work with the class yet. But when there's more, when these things are distributed more widely, computers and so forth, we will probably do that. But some students can do that on their own and have done that. But they come up with really interesting things that we never thought about. I mean, using one poster for biology to teach geography, and they use the images, but then they look at the images in a different way. So it continues to, have enough, I don't know, enough air and difference to allow people to come up with their own ideas.
Well, to come up with their own idea in a way that nobody ever thought possible. I mean, that's been the magic for me working with Wendy and with these projects that she's invented, that you make something where there was nothing, and nothing is more satisfying or long-lived in your memory as something that you've made yourself, where before there was just absolutely nothing in a classroom. So
I'm noticing the time, and we have a really lovely studio audience. So maybe we could open up to some questions and Katie, let us know if you can't hear. There's already one that's burning in the back row. Ariana, you might have to come a little closer just to make sure Katie can hear you, I think.
Yeah, just take the stuff off the chair.
Oh, if you actually here, you're welcome to have a
That
seat.
seems awkward. I'll just go stand behind.
Super awkward. Oh wait, this is too awkward. My question is just
how much do you think about curriculum design as art practice?
Yeah, I think about it as art practice. I definitely do. We were talking about the other day of the idea of creating the flow or crafting a flow. And, you know, I think definitely, you should answer too, Katie, because I think we both were very, as an artist, I think making curriculum is incredibly important, because it's another image where you have the piece or whatever the image is, and then you figure out a piece to open up the discussion on that piece. And I know that what they usually do is put educators in to do that.
Right.
And I would never let anybody else try to not let anybody else do it for an exhibition I have or something like that, because it's all connected for me. And yeah.
Katie, do you wanna?
Thoughts about that?
well, I think I'm more behind. I'm in the sidelines in terms of the curriculum. I mean, it's been fascinating for me to listen to students, like what they can say about an image and how it like vastly expands the topic that they're assigned to talk about. So it's more like the posters or the images, or whatever we're calling this methodology is, it's like a whole new way of opening another way of thinking or seeing, regardless of what the topic might be.
Well, I wish we had them here, which is like a big problem.
You wish you had what?
Had the posters here,
Oh,
because they're beautiful. I mean, they are. I think that they're art pieces. I mean, and you do too. They're up in your studio.
oh yeah. No, I do. I love them.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. So in that way, I think that the objects are important, as well as the curriculum.
Yeah.
And and also when they're up in schools, they don't have anything on the walls in the schools, and that was one of our other things that we were thinking about is adding this dimension, helping them add this dimension to their building.
Michelle.
Yeah, so thank you so much. It's so wonderful to just hear you talk about your work. And I think one of the things that's so evident is this project is so deep, and there's been so much, there's years, invested in growth. And it brings me to thinking about, our students who are leaving and about ready to graduate. And I'm just thinking about how do you begin? So when you enter a project, and are there certain things that you do, like for you as an artist, to begin?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I can really remember going to Tanzania and, just not having any, thinking, okay, this is fine. I'm going to take my son, we'll go on a safari, because he was little then, and, it's a be good experience. But then as soon as I was there and, these things were happening, like I explained the discomfort of the teachers and different things, I was just fascinated, by where I was, and that I had a relationship to them that I needed to figure out what was going on and what I could do. So it's just really hard listening, I think, and watching, asking questions, and being uncomfortable. I think those are things that are all incredibly important to me.
Well, that's such a great piece of advice. Do something that makes you uncomfortable. Just go out and do something you would never do.
Yeah, like what you're doing in politics right now in Pennsylvania.
But your answer just reminds me of the workshop we had with you on Sunday, where it is uncomfortable to read pictures that are not from our culture, and trying to be very culturally sensitive, but also really inquisitive. So in a sense, you're reading your place as a beginning, in the same way you're inviting people to read pictures through these posters and doing workshops. It's a cool overlap.
Yeah, and I just want to go off of what Laura's saying, your other work. I'm thinking of Portraits and Dreams.
Yeah.
Should I hold up the book?
Sure.
But in this project, and I think in all of your work, that's what you're doing, is you're opening up this other way of viewing and thinking, which, to meet these photographs that these children are making, you have to know your own place and what you're thinking yourself. So even though you're seeing what they're thinking, it's forcing you to reflect on your own way of thinking and seeing.
True.
And this is another book, which Magic Eyes, that is from Colombia, and this is a very sort of radical design, which there was a lot of controversy about. You realize that, Katy? But it's brilliant because it's a story of one family in Colombia, over 3 generations, and it's in text, the story, and it's from interviews that I did with the oldest child in the family, about the past and her future ideas. And so Katy did this with, this kind of design of the pages, so that they would go across the page, the text would go across the page, and make a square, because all the images were square, and the images are made by me and they're made by students, and you don't know who took what until you go to the back of the book, and it which was because I was using the Hasselblad and they were using the Instamatic, and I was very interested in that point in confusing people, and also trying to make the statement that why were people always thought that my pictures must be better than their pictures, and so I wanted to break that up, and Katy, I don't know if we ever even talked about that, but Katy understood that and made this design that that really got to the heart of it.
We have a couple more minutes, so are there any? We could talk about this book much longer. but I would love to know if there are other questions. Please jump in, even if you don't know the question yet. You can just start talking. This is a great crowd to do that in. It looks like you have one.
I mean, I love your use of black and white with your photos. I think it's really powerful, and I'm assuming a lot of that is due to the type of camera you're using. But did you think about that you wanted these to be black and white rather than color?
Well, I don't do that all the time now, but I did it then because also the students were developing and printing their own pictures when I was in Kentucky. And, you couldn't really do that with color, or they're much too complicated. And I wanted them to be able to do all parts of the process, which they did. They even developed their film, but they measured the raw chemicals to make the chemicals with the scale. So, it was a real big loss for me when I had to move to digital, because they weren't working on all these things. They couldn't understand them in the same way. So I was depressed for a while. But I sort of
But Wendy, I think you've hit on a really key component to your working method, which is participatory, that everybody gets to work. It's not just sitting there and listening.
Oh, yeah.
You're working making a list, or you're working making a thing, or you're working describing something, but you're very much an active part in the learning experience. You're not just a subject.
Yeah, and it was great. And also for kids being together, it was great because it was their space, like the dark room was their space, so they knew it, and they were very respectful of it, and so that doesn't normally happen in schools.
Mo.
On that note, I'm not a photographer, but I do think a lot about tools and how working with a thing with other people is part of a social process. How do you think about that when you come into a place with a tool? What is that process for you that you want to share with with a group of people, or with a
Well, I mean, part of it is really, first of all, figuring out what the tool is going to be. I mean, what camera or whatever. If I'm going to, in the beginning, the only camera was Instamatics. So there wasn't a lot of choice in that. But once there was a choice in that, I wanted to know as much about that tool as I could, so that I could, teach them in the simplest way that they would have the most, most flexibility, and if the technology wouldn't get in the way. And then those things, what was really great about the Instamatic and the developing and the printing was that there were pieces to that process. And so the pieces of it were, they were learned separately, but also they were learned separately in a way that you could understand that, what was happening technologically, and that's what makes digital difficult, but or less exciting or whatever. And especially for kids who have learning disabilities, that if you work on one piece of it, then you have some time to get to another piece of it. And, it's really helpful. But yeah, I think that's a good question about the tools, because I think they're really important. And I want them to be as successful with the tools as they can be. And I know that they can be. I mean, a lot of people think, just, it's an innocent eye, give them the camera, and, that's great. But there's more to it than that. There can be more to it than that.
We are at the end of our time together. I do want to thank Wendy and Katy and our audience here, and my co-conversationalist, Rebecca Copper, and also our fabulous Portland State University bookstore, who've been so hospitable, Mark, Alyssa, Aaron, and Mia. We also have a great tech person, John Cox, who is my partner. We have a tech person also monitoring the Zoom, Shelby Loomis. This is also our first social practice club event of the year, and it couldn't have been done without Mo Geiger and Shelby helping to make sure the 10 chairs arrived, which they did, and now people are sitting in them, and it's very satisfying. We will share this recording, and there'll be a way to get in touch if you have a question afterwards. So thank you so much. Should I say the last word, or do you have a last?
No, go ahead.
Do you have a last word?
I don't. Take it away, Laura.
All right. Well, goodbye, friends online, and talk to you soon. Bye, Katie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.